Hi, this is Paul, and I'm continuing my commentary series on Jordan Peterson's biblical series, and I'm starting video number 3 of Peterson's, what he called God and the Hierarchy of Authority. Now, my intention was I would love to get through his 15 videos before he restarts them in the spring. And so my intention was, boy, I'm going to dive into these things. I'm just going to do a running commentary, but I started this video and right away there was an idea that was just too interesting that I couldn't pass it up. And so essentially what I'm doing, and why I call this a commentary series, is that, like biblical commentaries that you see behind me, when he says something, often I want to pause and I want to go on a deeper dive, or he just kind of throws away a comment or refers to something, and I have to go and check out that comment. Now, when a few years ago I was doing this to a lot of Tim Keller sermons, I would do it on my blog. I didn't do any YouTubes from it. But, you know, what I found in doing this to Tim Keller's sermons is that often, you know, his attribution wasn't necessarily quite correct. And this is something preachers do all the time. We're always talking off the top of our head. We get a lot of things wrong. And so it's worthwhile chasing down a reference. In terms of spoken word, you don't have footnotes like you have in written word. That, again, gets into this ongoing musing that I'm doing with Neil Postman and amusing ourselves to death. This YouTube format is different, and so when you're speaking, you don't have a footnote. You can refer to something, and then you have to chase down that. Citation, and usually when you chase down that citation, you learn even more. And that was the case. Again, I wasn't even going to do a PowerPoint. I was just going to run the Peterson thing, and I was going to give comments, and I'm going to try doing that again. But right off the bat, with this one, he made a comment and he had a citation, and I had to track it down, and it was well worth finding. So let's start. Let's begin with the beginning of biblical series number 3.
Make a joke with Sam Harris the last time they talked about the stories that I want to cover tonight. One of the things that just absolutely staggers me about them, especially the story of Cain and Abel, which I hope to get to, is
which he won't.
So short,
not near it.
It's like 10, 11 lines. There's nothing to it at all. And I've found that it's essentially inexhaustible in its capacity to reveal meaning. And I don't exactly know what to make of that. I mean, I think, you know, because I said I was going to take as rational an approach to this issue as I possibly could. I think it has something to do with this intense process of condensation across very long periods of time. That's the simplest explanation. But
okay, this intense condensation process over time. We're talking about essentially a Darwinian process by which the Bible comes forward, and how these stories get perfected and refined and narrowed down. And if you go back and look at the video I did on Jordan Peterson's Bible, this is in a sense his prolegomena for the Bible, in terms of, okay, where do we get the Bible from? Why should the Bible have credibility in our secular world, even if we are living within a buffered self, where we are skeptical about supernaturalism, we are skeptical about revelation? Why should the Bible have a hearing? Again, this is Jordan Peterson's big agenda with this biblical series, besides learning himself, which is what he says.
I'll tell you, the information in there is so densely packed that it really is. It's not that easy to come up with an explanation for that. Not one that I find fully compelling. I mean, I do think that the really old stories, and we've been covering the really archaic stories in the Bible so far, I think that one of the things that you can be virtually certain about is that everything about them that was memorable was remembered, right? And so in some sense, and this is kind of like the idea of Richard Dawkins' ideas of memes, which is often why I thought that Richard Dawkins, if he was a little bit more mystically inclined, he would have become Carl Jung, because their theories are unbelievably similar. The similar of meme and the similar of the idea of archetype of the collective unconscious are very, very similar ideas, except the Jungian idea is far more profound in my estimation. Well, it just is. He thought it through so much better, you know, because Dawkins tended to think of meme as sort of like a mind worm, you know, something that would infest a mind and maybe multiple minds, but he never really I don't think he really ever took the idea with the seriousness it deserved. And I did hear him actually make a joke with Sam Harris the last time they talked about the fact that there was some possibility that production of memes, say religious memes, could alter evolutionary history, and they both avoided that topic instantly. They had a big laugh about it and then decided they weren't going to go down that road, and so that was quite interesting to me. But
and right there, I could not get beyond that statement. I said I have to find that conversation, and I think I found it. And again, what Peterson is talking about here isn't really about memes, and so let's then jump into what I think that conversation is that he's referring to. And if I have this wrong, go ahead and correct me in the comments section. But so of course, like I said, this puts me on this trail, and I say I want to find this conversation between Dawkins and Harris. Now again, why is this important? Because again, Peterson's agenda here is to give us a naturalistic psychological narrative, origin narrative in a sense of the Bible. And this would operate as a justification for bringing the Bible, in a sense, back into the public sphere of Western civilization. His larger, one of the things, Peterson has a number of agendas, and everybody has agendas. I don't mean that pejoratively, but his agenda is that the path of Western civilization has been, again, he gets this from Dostoevsky, and Nietzsche, that the path of Western civilization moves forward, and if Western civilization loses its moors, it will slide off either into tyranny or nihilism. And he sees the rise of postmodern neo-Marxism, which is his big political and social agenda. He sees that rise as an expression of society sliding off into tyranny. And so he believes that if society is going to keep the balance, it's going to have to continue to stay connected with the biblical material. But the problem he has is that culturally, increasingly, well, let me back up a little bit. In the American Revolution, the attempt was, let's have a foundation other than Christianity for our society. And so the federal government, the federal Constitution of the United States wanted we were going to have a secular society. And so you have the Declaration of Independence. But a lot of this obviously was held within it the legacy of Christendom. And so Nietzsche's critique was that, well, yeah, they weren't owning up to the legacy of Christendom, and so you're going to need to develop a new myth. And of course, this is where Peterson and Nietzsche split, and I dealt with this in previous videos. But the question for Peterson then is what happened in Western civilization was that we said, well, we cannot have the Bible in public life. And what we've seen over the last, since the sexual revolution in the 60s, since the counterculture in the 60s, this has been progressing in Western culture, and increasingly, whereas say in the 50s, and I dealt with this in my video on liars, Jordan Peterson calling pastors liars, in the 1950s, the West in the Cold War, especially the American government under the Eisenhower administration, really saw God as an ally. And so God and church were seen as allies in this broader Cold War of resisting the Soviet Union. And so what happened then is that God was in. But now in the 60s, 70s, 80s, God was out. Now with the rise of the struggle against Islamic terrorism, the suspicion is that religions and fundamentalisms, you heard this especially after 9/11, maybe the problem isn't religion, it's fundamentalisms. And so we can't have fundamentalisms. And although nobody worries about the Amish being terrorists, and they're fundamentalists by anyone's standard. But so then the question is, well, we can't have the Bible in society, and especially with questions about women. Suddenly, this alignment that was preserved in the 50s, that Peterson talked about, this alignment split up, and so we need to get the Bible out of society. So the Bible is immoral, and so we need to do away with the Bible. And Peterson, in a sense, is recognizing that if the Bible's going to come back in, there needs to be a psychological, scientific, even scientistic rationale and origin story from the Bible which will justify its place at the table. And again, I've dealt with this in a bunch of the past videos. And so this is part of Peterson's mission. And he's coming to terms with the Bible, and what he's found in the Bible is a lot of wisdom. And in a future video, I want to talk specifically about wisdom, because there's some relationships between wisdom and narrative. And so Peterson has found wisdom in the Bible, and so there's kind of a wisdom concordism that's happening with Peterson, and he's saying, I'm finding wisdom in the Bible, and so I'm trying to figure out what the Bible is, and with the help of Carl Jung and his ideas about the collective subconscious, I think we can propose a defense for the Bible once again having a seat at the table in terms of Western civilization. Now, it's not going to be how, let's say, in the politics of the United States, the 1980s, the moral majority, the way they tried bringing the Bible in. That was fundamentalism. It's not going to be Mike Pence and his rule about not having dinner with women. It's going to be that, but the Bible needs a seat at the table, and so Peterson is, in a sense, offering the way in which the Bible should have this seat. And this really was, in a sense, stalking his conversation on the Joe Rogan show with Brett Weinstein about whether or not the Bible should be in there. And Brett said, well, I think there's a lot of Darwinistic encapsulated wisdom in the Bible, but it's horribly outdated, and so we bring this into our peril. And Peterson, in a sense, turns the tables on that, says, no, you can't recreate a fairy tale. We exclude it at our peril, because if we lose the moorings in the Bible, we're either going to slide into nihilism or we're going to slide into tyranny. And what happens then is that, okay, so what's been happening now in terms of all these people that are writing me and saying I used to be an atheist and now I'm considering Christianity? Well, a lot of what's happening is that culturally, as a society, there's the fear of sliding into tyranny as the political left in the English-speaking nations are getting increasingly illiberal. How the legislation like C-16 and some of the legislation in the United States is curbing free speech, and so now moderates and people on the right, and even people on the moderate left, are looking at this and saying, why? The fringe left is getting incredibly illiberal. And Peterson sees this as the cultural manifestation of sliding into tyranny. But now, for many individuals out there who have lived within this secular realm, they have, it's Peterson's comments in Maps of Meaning about tyranny. It was in Maps of Meanings or Personality, I don't remember which, but his comments in there about tyranny were really important, because he mentioned that tyranny, in fact, scales down all the way into the individual, and in a sense, you self-tyrannize. And so while Peterson is looking at the society and his political agenda is talking about this is the way we're sliding into tyranny, people as individuals are realizing they're sliding into nihilism. And in fact, I would want to put tyranny and nihilism together and say that nihilism is actually a mode of self-tyranny. And people who have become post-Christians experience this because, boy, they appreciated Christianity. It gave them this wonderful, let's call it a fairy tale. Christianity gave them this wonderful fairy tale. There was a God in heaven that loved them. You had a fandom church around you in which you could live out your fairy tale. Your parents believed it. It was like, Santa Claus doesn't get dispelled when you turn 7 years old. And if there's any 6-year-olds listening that I just demythologized, I'm sorry. But religion is, according to the skeptics and some of the hardcore, the four, what Alvin Plantinga calls the four horsemen. According to the skeptics, Christianity is like Santa Claus. And so these people who are post-Christian, on one hand, are saying, as a rational, upstanding citizen, and we're going to talk a little bit later in this video about sociology of knowledge and the way that reinforces secularism. The post-Christian, in a sense, says, I loved believing in Jesus. I loved going to church. I loved living in the fandom of the Bible. I loved living out this life where there was a God above and you know, maybe if you had good Christian parents. I mean, all of this was reinforced, and it was wonderful. And in the church, we all helped each other, we loved each other. There was a community of people that had my back. I could live within the fandom, and it's the dream of everyone who is a huge Harry Potter fan. I mean, you go down to Universal Studios just so you can see a made-up castle and ride on a little roller coaster, or you get dressed up on Halloween as someone from Hogwarts. And but what is better than the church? Then you get to live in your fandom, and your Bible is even bigger than Tolkien. You know, the Lord of the Rings is a meaty book, and Tolkien gives a rich mythology. But the Bible of the mythology of the Bible is so immense and you're so able to live within it. And in fact, in the history of the church, you've got drama in terms of conflict between different factions. You get the adrenaline rush of defending your tribe. But also in the past, there was this mapping. I love how Jordan Peterson's always doing this with his hands. And I think he's, again, we act before we know. And when he does this, it's something in me gets what he's saying. And so throughout the history of the world, our worlds were mapped together. And so all of Europe got to live in this fandom. And yeah, maybe we didn't have antibiotics, and maybe we didn't know where the plague was coming from. But you know what? It was a rich, meaningful environment. And in fact, if you listen to Peterson, I mean, ancient people, despite the fact that they didn't have cars and they didn't have antibiotics and they didn't have modern medicine, and they had, horrendous rates of infant mortality and all kinds of wars and instability, people were, in fact, happy in the midst of enormous suffering because they had meaning. And so what has happened to many individuals in a post-Christian age, they said, look, I've got to give up the Christian myth, but doggone it, I'm not happy without it. That's nihilism. That's self-tyranny. And so again, Peterson's goal here is to bring the Bible in and have the Bible once again come into the public world, have the Bible once again come into public life, and in a sense remythologize the West. Now Peterson's remythology is not a full-orbed Christendom, and once I get sufficiently versed in Peterson, I'm going to probably be able to whittle this down again into a 4-minute video on who Jordan Peterson's God is. But in a sense, he's saying, hey, if we don't recapture this stuff, as a community, we're going to slide off into tyranny. And as individuals, we're going to slide off into nihilism, which is in some ways self-tyranny. And it's self-tyranny because, gosh, you want to live in the fairy tale, but your, so-called adult mind won't let you. And so, man, maybe when you get Alzheimer's someday and you're living in the nursing home, maybe then you can slip off into a fairy tale and be happy. But for now, bucko, clean your room and be a materialist. Although that's kind of counter what the buckos are doing. I get that. So this is Jordan Peterson's Bible. So of course I've got to find this Sam Harris quote. And so looking around, I found this, and it's not on YouTube. It's just in audio. And so I've got to, I think it's around minute 7.
Is that anywhere in the universe where self-replicating coded information arises, that could be fair game for Darwinian evolution, for Darwinian selection. And yet we haven't done that to humans.
They begin their conversation with Sam Harris talking about just connecting with Dawkins over a stroke that he had. And then Sam Harris asking, because Dawkins is an evolutionary biologist, talking about evolution, and they begin the conversation with talking about, and this is an important part, talking about, what do you think is going to happen to human beings in the past?
Such that there's a barrier to gene flow.
Sorry, how is humanity going to evolve in the next iteration? Now, this is important because a little bit later I'm going to get into Harari, but it's important for us to touch on this.
I think it would take more than a stroke to do that to me.
This is how he doesn't sing well.
Our first question that one of you may have asked, if you had a time machine and could travel 500 years into the future, what do you think you would find biologically? Assuming our direct descendants still exist and haven't uploaded themselves into the matrix, will we be recognizably human?
500 years is too short a time to expect any genetic evolutionary change.
But what about
Now that's an important idea right there, and mark that, because later when we get to the relationship between the storyverse and how we are in genetics, this question of the amount of time you need is essential, because this obviously also with Jordan Peterson's understanding of the development of the Bible is important, because you've got hundreds of thousands and millions of years, and in some ways, once our minds get to this millions of years thing, we begin to say, oh wow, well, what could happen in millions of years? It's such a huge number, I can't conceive of it. And so basically Richard Dawkins is making the point that 500 years is nothing in terms of biological evolution. And so 500 years from now, left by ourselves, biologically, we probably shouldn't change much. Now, this gets into some of Jordan Peterson's conversation. Yeah, but there's differentiation. We're muddling with the pill, which is changing how we're pairing mate selection, and that's going to change us. And so you've got an interesting conversation. I would love to hear Dawkins and Peterson have a conversation about evolution on this. But now Harris comes in with another really interesting point.
with our own meddling, the genetic engineering that we're
That's
surely going to do?
Yes, I mean, I suppose that is a possibility. If by then we've colonized Mars, such that there's a barrier to gene flow between the parent planet Earth and the colony on Mars, then it's possible that the Mars colony might have diverged. But 500 years is a short time.
Now, the Mars colony idea is a really interesting idea because, and this is going to get into a little bit later when we get into his ideas about, it isn't really about memes that Peterson is talking about, and we'll see that in a minute. But okay, so people are on Mars. Well, how would living on Mars, slightly different gravitational forces, less sun, how would these kind of environmental things affect people's genes? That would be a very interesting experiment. So if any of you want to go on your one-way trip to Mars, well, you know, I'll be happy to hear how it goes. I ain't going with you. But anyway, here we go.
But how much of an appetite do you think we will have, given what we currently are, to change ourselves, given the ability to do so in radical ways?
Well, we've had the ability to change cows and horses and pigs and cabbages and dogs and roses for hundreds, thousands of years. And although we've changed all those species almost beyond recognition, when you think that a Pekingese or a poodle or a pug or a bulldog is a wolf, it still thinks it's a wolf.
The world's worst wolf.
And yet we haven't done that to humans. So it looks as though we don't seem to have had much of an appetite to do that with respect to the selection part of the Darwinian equation. We're now just beginning to have the possibility of doing it to the mutation part of the Darwinian equation, namely genetic.
And again, I would love to hear Peterson talk to Dawkins about this, because the selection part, and this is one of Peterson's big points, that, you know, with the pill we have, and then with the ripples that the pill has had on us, we have no idea where this is leading. And I think again, when Peterson makes points like this, I have my own wisdom concordism attraction to Peterson. This is why I listen to his videos, because he makes statements like that, and I listen to it and I think, boy, doggone it, I think he's right about that. What else could he be right about? I should keep listening to this guy. And so the point that Dawkins makes here is that, boy, we've been really reticent. We've changed pigs and horses and cows and dogs. Look at the difference in dogs. Tiny little dog is a descendant of a wolf. We've had no scruples about managing these animals. And in fact, again, if you listen to, I'm going to bring up Yuval Harari later in this video. If you listen to Harari's comments in Homo Deus, you know, he's raising questions about, you know, look at what we've done to animals. We never do this to people. Why are we so biased in terms of preserving human privilege? And now I personally think we're biased preserving human privilege, and this goes back to the Imago Dei in Genesis 1. And I think it's right that we do so. And I think it's interesting that, in fact, we have done so. But Dawkins' point about we've been really reticent about monkeying with ourselves. And again, I would say there's probably some real wisdom in that. But this is obviously going to be one of the big moral and ethical issues for the next 50, 100 years or even longer moving forward. So I'm not even up to say I'm doing it to Harris and Dawkins here, what I do to Peterson, and I just can't help myself. So, but now we're coming to the point I really wanted to talk about.
Engineering. But it's not obvious why, if we didn't have the motivation to selectively breed humans, why we should have the motivation to selectively mutate humans.
Kind of a related point.
Now again, the motivation to selectively breed humans, I wonder about that. I mean, especially in the context of slavery, when human beings become property, I think the motivation and the temerity to do such a thing, which again, what we're exposing here, and when I looked at Sam Harris's claim that his ethical system is somehow like in a clean room pure of Christendom, I don't buy it at all. And the reason for that is humanism. And I don't think you can have humanism without the Imago Dei. It's too deeply rooted in it. And if you listen to, for example, Nicholas Waltersdorf, who is a philosopher from the Christian Reformed Church and Calvin College, and one come to Calvin College, yeah, Calvin College, and then Yale Divinity School. Nicholas Waltersdorf made the point that if we lose the Imago Dei, we will probably lose humanism. And in that sense, Nicholas Waltersdorf is doing a similar thing to Jordan Peterson and saying, if we lose this more in our cultural legacy, we could lose the whole culture. And so I think any real humanist, and I don't mean just, someone who prioritizes their own tribe. That's a tribalist. And I'm not saying tribalism is wrong. Tribalism is one of these things that we have to deal with and comes to terms with. It's good and it's bad, but it's inescapable for us. But a humanist, someone who would basically look across and see another human being, even if they are in a vegetative state, or even if they are a helpless infant, or this gets into the abortion question: is an unborn fetus a human being? Ought they to be given that status? And if so, when? This human privilege, I think if you lose the Imago Dei, you are in danger of losing humanism. And if you lose humanism, we lose what it is that we've enjoyed in Western civilization. So now we're going to get into the meme between these two.
You're obviously very famous for having introduced this concept of a meme. How seriously should we take the analogy to a gene with a meme?
It was intended as an analogy to a gene. The idea is that anywhere in the universe where self-replicating coded information arises, that could be fair game for Darwinian evolution, for Darwinian selection.
Now, right there, I think is the heart. There's another YouTube out from Oxford where he's explaining this. It's about an 8-minute explanation, and it's a good one too, but I didn't want to have both of them in there. Anytime you have coded information, there's the possibility of, I think we have to talk about it this way, a Darwinistic type process. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, that this coded information will somehow have a competitive advantage over this. And then this gets into Peterson, this infinite mass of other coded informations. For example, sometimes you have the question of randomness. How many monkeys with typewriters do you need to come up with the works of Shakespeare? And, again, this gets into the thinking about big things. We would say, well, given limitless monkeys and given limitless typewriters, at some point, that room is going to come up with the works of William Shakespeare. And a lot of people have expressed skepticism about this. And part of the reason they've expressed skepticism about this with respect to the odds of the universe being completely of chance is that whereas, say, 16 billion years since the Big Bang sounds like a very long time, the number of monkeys and the number of typewriters you need in the room to come up with the works of William Shakespeare probably needs more time than that. Now, we don't know, we can't run the experiment, but even with that thought experiment itself, well, where do you get the monkeys and the typewriters from? Because the monkeys themselves are products of this, and the typewriters themselves are products of this, and both typewriters and monkeys are enormously complex and after a great long chain of things. Even because I would say you put a billion monkeys in a room with a billion typewriters, I don't know how long it would take for you to get a single sentence, because at some point those doggone monkeys have to get A, S, D, F, G, just like I had to do in typing class when I was in high school, and figure out how to get the paper. Okay, so you're going to put the paper in, the typewriters, and you're going to have them there. Well, when on earth are the monkeys going to sit down there and type instead of picking up the typewriter and smashing it against each other while they're throwing poop on each other? So again, this gets into all of Peterson's points that, this is where we're going in this, that there's an a priori understanding that allows the monkeys and the typewriters to finally produce something. And so back to Dawkins' meme idea that with strings of information, now again, as we represent DNA, now remember the 4 letters of DNA are our representation of it. Real DNA is real DNA. And when we see those strings of 4 numbers, how we have represented DNA in terms of those 4 amino acids, I wish I had a better education in biology now, but as we represent DNA in terms of those 4 strings, we take a representation of it into human language, and we do so in a way that our computers can process. And it's important to remember that all of this is representation of a reality. And we are dealing, in a sense, with representation. So it is a second level derivation from the real thing, second level at least. And so his idea is that a string of information or a string of language can operate as DNA has in terms of a Darwinistic mechanism, that some will outcompete the others and some will get carried through. And this is where you get the idea of a mind virus. And I think after listening to Dawkins, I'm a little less, I think Peterson's description of a religion as a mind virus is actually a little more pejorative than Dawkins says. I want to be fair to Dawkins, because when you think about it, you say, yeah, I really see that metaphor now in terms of a mind virus. Yep, and here I'm a pastor saying I think this mind virus idea has something to it. So, but again, within the context of Darwin and DNA and something being able to reproduce. So let's hear Dawkins flesh this out a little more further.
And I wanted to end the selfish gene by making that point, because the whole of the rest of the book had been extolling the gene as the unit of selection. So I wanted to make the point, it doesn't have to be DNA, it could be anything which is self-replicating. Well,
So again, anything which is self-replicating. So it can be words, it can be an idea, and he's going to go into a great illustration of this.
One could speculate about life on other planets being mediated by a replicator other than DNA. But then I thought, or a computer virus would have done the job as well, but I didn't know about them in 1976. So I thought, well, what about cultural inheritance? Anything where we have imitation is potentially analogous to genetic replication. So
anything where we have imitation. Now we're getting into Jordan Peterson's creatures looking at each other and our Jungian great cloud of witness, that, you know, the watchers inside our head are watching each other in the ways that the conscious mind isn't conscious of, because we're taking in way more than the conscious mind actually knows. So anything that can be imitated, anything that can be replicated, can have this Darwinistic pattern to it and Darwinistic multiplication.
Something like a craze at a school. Something like a craze for a particular kind of toy. I introduced to my boarding school a craze for origami paper folding to make a Chinese junk. And it spread exactly like a measles epidemic through the school, and then died away like a measles epidemic. Interestingly, I had learned to do this from my father, and he had learned it from an almost identical epidemic at the same school 26 years earlier. So the epidemiology of meme spread is very similar to gene spread.
And I love that. I love that illustration. It's a terrific illustration because, again, it's not even verbal. It's a little origami junk. He does it at school. Everybody gets excited about it. And, you know, I remember when I was in school, there were what we called click-clacks, were these plastic balls on strings. And in New Jersey in the 1970s, boy, click-clacks went through school. And then I just realized that a few years ago you have this ball and cup thing and this toy, and boy, that went through school. And then it's these spinner things that are going through. And I think Dawkins is right that here, you know, things go viral. And the reason we use viral there is because that's a metaphor, obviously, from physical viruses, and we understand how things get transmitted like this. And so this idea of meme is that things go viral. But now we're going to have to ask questions. Okay, what is a meme? And I think a bigger question to ask is, what dependent substrate does a meme require? In other words, for your little junket, your little paper junket thing, you need children with eyeballs. You need children who have developed a degree of hand-eye coordination. You need children who have within them an imaginary of what boats are, and a representation, a brain that's capable of taking what a boat is on the water and creating a representation and connecting that to. And you're probably also going to need a social substrata which has junkets as kind of an interesting idea. They're exotic enough. It's China, and you have the allure of something far away, and the hold that China has had on the Western imagination that goes all the way back to the age of discovery and Columbus, wanting to find a way to China. Again, I've been reading that book 1493, and Europe was a backwater, and China didn't trade with Europe because Europe didn't have anything China wanted until actually silver came along. So this idea of meme is really powerful and it's really important, but we're going to have to pay attention to what memes are dependent upon. What is the strata that a meme requires? And again, the junket requires a whole group of children with at least enough disposable income for paper, and at least enough manual dexterity for fingers, and at least eyeballs that can see someone else do it, and a cultural background and a social background that would make little Chinese ships attractive to them. And that's why they're making little junkets instead of, for example, little cranes. Now, you could even ask yourself, well, what about folding paper makes that into junkets? And I guess this gets into all of Peterson's conversation about, the world is apparently limitless, but there's huge number of things that bring it down into specific things. And all those things would require this meme being little origami paper junkets. And on one hand, you can look at the aspect of meme and say, isn't it amazing how generation after generation in this one English school, you would have this fad which goes through the school like a virus. It proliferates and then it decreases because everybody's just kind of done with making junkets. And, the year later, some kid comes up with a paper junket and everybody is like, oh, we did that last year. All of that situation is so enormously complex that on one hand, you have to appreciate the power of the meme. On the other hand, you had better not lose sight of this enormous context that was required for the meme to actually work. And that is, in fact, I think, part of the real contribution that Jordan Peterson is making in this conversation, because everyone is saying, look at the meme. And Peterson is saying, yeah, look at the meme. But do you really appreciate what is required for that meme to actually function? And I think in some ways that's analogous to, look at this amazing society we live in. The lights are on. I'm sitting in a room. Things are in order. I'm not worried about some crazy mob backing down my door. And Peterson's saying, yeah, look at all that is required for us to enjoy what the vast majority of human beings have never enjoyed. We ought to pause and have a bit of gratitude and have a bit of responsibility about what is required to maintain this, and not to throw it all away on, you know, a nuclear pissing contest with the Soviet Union or with North Korea. So let's keep playing, and I got to get a drink of water.
But it's only interesting from a Darwinian point of view if the memes that spread are the ones that are good at spreading, if there is some kind of selective effect, and it's plausible that it should be. Clothes fashions spread because people find them cool, or something like a reverse baseball cap, which, by the way, lowers the IQ by a full 10 points.
That's probably the first remark that he's going to get in trouble for. I'm counting.
But I think you can probably treat religious memes in the same way. I mean, religious ideas spread like a virus. So I've called them virus of the mind. So they either pass down the generations like DNA does, and of course, obviously religions pass down generations, but they also spread sideways in epidemics when you've got a particularly charismatic vector.
Okay, and now we get into this this idea of religion spreading, and this is so this is the conversation that Peterson is talking about and referring to at the beginning of the biblical series, and he gives it kind of like a throwaway line, but it's very important and foundational. I think, again, the reason Peterson brings it up is this is foundational to his project. This idea, which I don't think he's developing, and he's feeling his way through it, this idea that texts and religious ideas, now if you go back to the John Walton video I played, now remember, almost everything in the Bible was oral before it was textual. And if you look at the Bible, let me grab a Bible here. Now this one's a little distorted because this is a, if you look at the Bible and you say, well, there's a little bit of poetry in the first parts of it, but once you get past, let's say, Esther, and then you get into Job, and then, well, this one has an apocrypha, so that's throwing it off a little bit too. But if you get from Job all the way to the end of Malachi, most of the prophets are in poetry. Why? Well, because in a sense, poetry is weaponized meme. Poetry developed because they needed a way to transmit ideas accurately. Now, this is in some ways analogous to Peterson's compression of stories. And so if in Peterson's idea, old stories get reworked and reworked and kind of brought down to its archetypal nub, where it is so powerful and it is so compressed that you can't forget it. It becomes a meme. Poetry is weaponized meme, in that they're saying, gosh, we want to remember this. Well, how can we remember this? Well, a stitch in time saves 9. Well, the simple act of rhyming makes me remember it, and because it's clever, I remember it. And so you've got, and Dawkins is going to talk about this. Now we're going to take rationality into the dynamic of meme, and we're going to say, okay, how can we put these things together? How can we put these two things together? How can we take these two things and put them together? Now, later when we get into C.S. Lewis's Miracles, we're going to ask, now let's take a step back and ask, what does it mean that we take rationality? What does it mean that we even see meme at all? What does it mean that we can say, boy, I really want to remember something, so I'm going to put it into a jingle. You deserve a break today, so get out and get away to McDonald's. Why do I remember this stupid thing? This seller of fast food when I was a child put this thing on TV and put it in my head, and now here at the age of 54, I can't forget the darn thing. It's a meme. It's a mind virus. It's in my head. I can sing jingles and commercials. I watched way too much TV as a child, like just about everybody in my generation, just like some of you are watching way too much YouTube. I watched way too much TV for my own good, and all of these silly commercials, 2 all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. Now again, someone my age will say, yeah, you know what is that? 2 all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. That's a Big Mac. Now, if you're younger than 50, you probably have no idea where that song came from. When I was young, my father used to sing a song about Bill Grogan's goat. Now that was going through schools in the 30s and the 40s when my father was young. These things get weaponized and these memes get going. So here are these two. And so I think Dawkins is dead on right. And that, this kind of this Darwinistic thing happens, but then you have to ask the question, is this sufficient to actually describe origins? And I don't think that question is obvious.
Of the virus, like Billy Graham or one of those types. So I think it's a genuinely interesting question whether the really successful religions like Roman Catholicism and Islam spread because the memes have high spreadability in their own right, like genes in Darwinism, or whether they're spread by Machiavellian priests who get together and work out what's the best marketing strategy to spread them. And I'm inclined to think that pure mimetic spread is plausible, and I'm interested in that. I haven't really run very much with the meme idea. The people who have are Dan Dennett, the philosopher, who talks in a very interesting way about memes in most of his recent books. And Susan Blackmore's another one who wrote a book called The Meme Machine. There are about 20 books now with the word meme in the title, which emphasize various aspects of it.
The fact that memes don't change truly randomly, does that run roughshod?
Oh, okay. Now let's. I got to remember where I am in my slides here. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about that after Harris makes his point here.
I don't think that really matters. Genes mutate randomly in the sense that they're not. Mutation is not directed towards improvement. The only improvement comes from selection, but mutation nevertheless is induced by things like cosmic rays, radioactivity, various mutagenic chemicals.
Okay, now this is important too. And again, I'm not a biologist, and doggone it, I wish I knew more Latin. I wish I knew more everything. But the fact that mutations are caused by other things, and what you find, I was just, again, in setting this up, I was reading Harari, and he was making the point again and again of the cognitive revolution. Well, why did the cognitive revolution happen to Homo sapiens? Well, it must have been a chance mutation. Okay. Now we're going to get into the philosophical question of a materialist world or a naturalist world. Can we even talk about chance? Or are we really talking about determinism? I mean, Harris famously says there's no free will. Okay, well, is it the situation that mutations are caused by, once we say mutations are caused, it's not chance. Now the system might be so amazingly complex that we can't account for it, but once we say cause, that this mutation is caused by, by some other factor in the environment, radiation, light, what have you, once you say it's caused, chance goes out the window. Now you might say, but reality is so enormously complex, near infinite, that reality is so enormously complex we can't know the cause. But the heart of a materialist world is to say everything is caused by something else, and there is no chance. Now this, boy, we're getting into some deep water here. But this is where all of this goes. So let's jump over here to the slides, because this is what I got out of the Metaphysical Club, and I've used this quote a few times. The point that Darwin made, it was not that nobody before Darwin was talking about evolution. Everyone was talking about evolution and selection. There's plenty of evolution. The purpose of On the Species was not to introduce the concept of evolution. It was to debunk the concept of supernatural intelligence. This was the agenda. The idea that the universe is the result of an idea. In other words, there can't be a mind behind the universe expressing intentionality. And this is, in fact, the big line. This is the big line of demarcation that we have. And my question is this line, is our focus on this line psychologically motivated? And what I mean by that is, why do we care about this so much? And I think the reason is because we care about persons in a way that we don't care about other things. Let me give you an example. If you use Gmail, you know Google is reading your email. And for, not too long ago, Microsoft wanted to make a big point that, we don't read your email. I think they probably do too. But when they say Google reads our email, we don't imagine that there is some employee over in Palo Alto who is scrolling through all the emails that Paul Vanderklay gets. No way. I mean, Gmail has way too many emails. What do we mean about Google reads my email? A computer algorithm goes through and looks at the language in my email and looks for things, creates a profile for me about the kinds of things I want so they can advertise to me, because Google is basically an advertising company. And I use selective text on my smartphone, and the more I text on my phone, the more that text selector knows what I text. For example, if things I'll commonly have to have on my things I commonly have to text is, are you picking up? And then I'll put one of the names of my children in there. Now, that text selector remembers the names of my children, and if I start with the first letters of their name, that usually prompts them, and I can select that. Now, is someone reading my text messages? Well, it depends what you mean by someone. Now, I would care if, maybe the person in the room next door were always reading my text messages. Why? Because people are chimps filled with snakes. People are enormously powerful, and in a way, I don't fear Google's algorithm reading my email like I would some employee in Palo Alto reading my email. But even that wouldn't bother me so much, because they'd probably start reading my email and think, God, this guy's boring. Why would I go nuts reading his emails? I go nuts reading my own emails sometimes. I go nuts writing my own emails. But the point is, what is a person? And so the idea of what happens here with Darwin is that Darwin is saying there's no person. Well, why do we care if there's a person or not? Why are we more comfortable with the idea that, well, it's not really random because mutation is being caused by something? So it's not even the idea that I'm not in control of my own destiny, because if you're a determinist, no, you're not in control of your own destiny, because free will is an illusion. So what's the issue? The issue is, I don't want another person poking around in my life doing things I don't want them to do. I have enormously invested in myself as a person. And I am enormously invested in my ego, and this gets into the idea that Christians have in terms of our relationship with God. We are pissed as hell that God is who he is and we are not him. And we don't like his privilege. And we don't like the fact that he can bring things into our life. And we don't like the idea that he has all of this power, so that when a tsunami goes out and takes out 300,000 or 400,000 people, we want to say, well, that's just random chance, or that's just, what happens with tectonic plates, and that's just what happens, and so no one is to blame. I feel better about that. But if I think there's a God in heaven that says, yeah, I'm going to move that water and 500,000 people are going to die, well, now I'm pissed, because now it's personal. Well, what's going on there? What's with that? That suddenly I'm more offended at the idea that a God took the lives of 500,000 people, but I'm less offended that tectonic movement took the lives of 500,000 people. And what I probably really care about is if I have a personal relationship with any one of those 500,000 people who lost their lives, and then it personally affects me. This is part of the reason psychologists and psychology is now coming into the conversations of philosophy and all of these conversations. I think this is part of the reason that why is Jordan Peterson making such big waves? Well, he's a psychologist. Well, so you've got Sam Harris, who is a philosopher by training, I think. You've got Richard Dawkins, who's a biologist by training. And why are they talking in a sense about psychology? And so now back to the purpose between Darwin is that we are allergic to the idea of supernatural intelligence. And I think we are allergic to this idea because we don't like the idea of another person making choices in our life. For a belief that species evolve is not incompatible with a belief in divine creation or with a belief in intelligent design. Progressive adaptation might simply be the mechanism God has selected to realize his intentions. And you'll hear Christians say this again and again, including Alvin Plantinga. What was radical about On the Origin of Species was not its evolutionism, but its materialism. Darwin wanted to establish something even his most loyal disciples were reluctant to admit. Why? Sociology of knowledge, pressure in terms of sociology. We're going to get into that when we get into Jung a little bit later. Which is that the species, including human beings, were created by and evolved according to processes that are entirely natural, chance-generated. Now again, a cosmic ray that comes in and cosmic radiation that comes in and hits a particular gene in my body and causes it to mutate and it becomes cancer. Is that chance? Chance is the wrong word. Because we're saying, no, it was caused by something. Well, what caused that cosmic radiation? Well, it was a star way out there. Well, what caused that? And that's why you have determinism going all the way to the Big Bang. That's why that system works that way. So chance is the wrong word. The question is mind. What we're allergic to is the idea that there's another mind out there. And the reason we don't like the idea that there's another mind out there, I think, is because, well, we would be happy if there's another mind out there if we believe that that mind was capable of being influenced by us. Well, do we have an idea like that? Oh, we sure do. What is it? Well, it's called prayer and theism and religion. What's our hang-up with religion? That's not a simple question to answer. What is our hang-up with religion? And I think this is exactly what Peterson is stimulating. Now this next page, when I read it in the Metaphysical Club, blew me away, and I've read it in a number of my my videos. Darwin regretted the word selection, selected intention. It's so built into our language we can't get rid of it. Natural selection is a blind process. Okay, now you're using a metaphor there. Why are you using the metaphor blind, and what is that metaphor connected with? It's connected with a person that we imagine has eyes. We want a blind process, just like Google reading our emails. We don't want another mind. We don't want to bump into the guy in Palo Alto that says, oh yeah, I've been reading your emails, Paul, and you know, your conversations about this Jordan Peterson guy, they're getting really interested. And here's the thing that would get the guy fired from Palo Alto. We'd say, yeah, Paul, you know, you had this conversation with this really interesting guy in the Netherlands. Yeah, you know who you are. You had this conversation with this really interesting guy in the Netherlands. And so I decided I was going to email him. And then the guy in the Netherlands who's been writing me suddenly gets an email from the other guy. And he says, now, wait a minute. Why are you reading his email? I didn't direct that towards you. Oh, well, what really don't we want? Why do we want this to be blind? We want to stay in control of our stuff. This is, in fact, the anxiety we have about Google. This is the anxiety we have about AI. This is the anxiety we have about God. We want to be in control. Well, now we're back into the Garden of Eden, and eventually we're going to get to Genesis 2 if I can ever get through this biblical series, but at this rate, I'm not going to get anywhere, just like Jordan Peterson isn't going to get to Cain and Abel. Darwin regretted the word selection suggested an intention. Natural selection is a blind process because the conditions to which the organism must adapt to order to survive are never the same. In other words, the idea behind Darwinistic selection is that there is a context and an aspect. And it's the dare I use the word, intersectionality. It's the intersectionality between the context and the aspect that produces a different change going into the future. Philosophically, that's what we're talking about when we're talking, I think, I'm not a biologist, but I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Darwinistic selection, that it's the intersectionality between an aspect and a context. Now, we're usually focusing on the aspect, but the aspect means nothing without the context, just like the origami junk means nothing without this entire background of this English schoolyard, which is enormously complex but not random. It's a story. Story is the best representation we have in it. Now, how does this get worked out? In periods of drought, when seeds are hard to find, finches that happen to have long, narrow beaks, good for foraging, will be favored over finches with broad, powerful beaks. More of their offspring will survive and reproduce. In periods of abundance, when seeds are large and their shells are hard, the broad-beaked finches will hold the adaptive advantage. Here's the key word. Finchness is a variable, not a constant. Finchness is a variable, not a constant. Well, where's this going? Well, when eventually I get into C.S. Lewis and his book Miracles, the first thing C.S. Lewis has to do is define supernatural and natural. Here's part of the reason I am doubtful about Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and their take on reality. I don't believe they're using their words the way they think they are. What do you mean by natural? Well, what you mean is that when they're talking about memes and they're talking about is a cow natural? You say, no, a cow has been enormously tampered with by human beings, with minds and intentionality. If you're an ardent naturalist, there's no such category as mind, because mind is no different from that radiation coming down and mutating an atom. It's an event. And this is exactly C.S. Lewis's point in his book Natural. If you're an ardent naturalist, there's no such thing as mind. There's no such thing as rationality. None of this exists, and all of our talk is no different from this particle, this radiation particle coming down and hitting one of my cells and causing it to mutate and causing cancer to grow in my body. There is no differentiating between that and me doing it to myself if I could. There is no differentiation between Google reading my emails and some dude in Palo Alto scrolling through everything Paul Vanderklay is getting in his inbox. There's no differentiation. And if there's no differentiation, then all of this talk and complaint about religion is just as meaningless as everything else. And now we're back in Jordan Peterson's conversation. We're sliding into nihilism, because is there any point to any of this once human beings no longer have their exclusive privilege of imagining the distinction between natural and man-made? Because if all we are piano keys, if all we are is naturalism, then that's just all we are. And there's no more drama in us than there is in any computer game that we might see. It's just an algorithm working its way out. So why on earth do I have to try and convince all the other algorithms that religion is foolish? What's the point? There's nothing in it. So I've been meeting with some of the buccos lately who have found their way to my church, and that's been tremendously fun. And one of the things that I'm gleaning from a number of them and listening to them is they're telling me basically, well, why did this grip me? Well, it's because they've gotten the message in this, something they've always believed: all my decisions matter. What I do in this world matters. Whether it's taking care of my child, whether it's stewarding my own thoughts, whether it's what I do when no one is looking. And again, if you listen to Jordan Peterson, this is exactly what he says. He's saying, all of this matters. Well, what does that sound like? Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little ears, what you hear. For your Father up above is looking down with love. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. But everyone who hears that song says, I'm terrified of another mind judging me. What's with us? Ever read Walker Percy, Lost in the Cosmos? I love that little book because he asks all these questions and he says, we are strange creatures. And we are strange creatures. So, basically, C.S. Lewis says, hey, if you're a naturalist, it's the whole show. You can't get away with these distinctions because every time you use these distinctions, you cut off the limb you're sitting on. Every time you use these distinctions, philosophically, you're slitting your own throat. There's no such thing as natural because it's all the whole show. Where this conversation really goes with Harris and Dawkins is what Dawkins calls extended phenotypes. Now, 1750, I got to remember that. Okay, let's jump over there.
The fact that memes are introduced by human creativity doesn't detract from the idea that some memes spread better than others.
Did you hear what he said? The fact that that memes are introduced by human creativity. If we are keys on a piano, there's no such thing as creativity. They are all atomic particles hitting the genetics in a cell and mutating it. There's no such thing, and you better not talk about the distinction between human creativity and natural process, because if naturalism is true, it's all just natural process. That's your position. You can't even live by it. Sorry, I just had to rant.
For selective reasons.
What do you think your most important contribution to science or culture at large has been or will be?
Now, this is the fun part of the conversation because Harris asked this question and Dawkins kind of stumbles a little bit. Then Harris just goes on to describe what he thinks his most significant contribution is, which I found frankly egotistical. But hey, we're all egotists if we're on YouTube, I'll tell you. But I found that to be hysterical. And Harris basically says, well, I think trying to integrate the sciences, which I thought was a really interesting answer, because that is in fact what I think Jordan Peterson is doing and why Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris are such fun conversation partners. Let's see if I can jump to 1750, where Richard Dawkins actually begins to talk about what he believes his
encounters, dreams
sits
with our scientific worldview, I think can be easily resolved if you can introspect with sufficient.
And again, this is why I don't buy Harris's agenda. I don't. He's a philosopher. He should get this. If you understand what naturalism is, if you understand what naturalism is, if you're walking down a beach and you see a rock and an iPhone, one is as natural as the other. Because the human processes that created the iPhone are no less natural than the geological processes that developed the rock. Why does everyone pass through the rock and pick up the iPhone? I think because we know something. And we know something about minds. Now you might say, well, okay, I assert that the physical layer is the top layer and all the other layers are derivative. All right, but you don't live that way. And that's exactly Peterson's point. And I think that's exactly why Peterson is right.
Perspicacity, and notice that you don't even have evidence for free will in your first-person experience. I think those are subjective data that are available. So there are ways to get access to interesting things through introspection, but they don't actually include the existence of your brain.
Very hard to communicate to other people.
Yeah, but I mean that's true.
Very hard to communicate because none of us believe it. And we never will. Because the day we do, we'll be nihilists and we'll sit around and say, well, put me in a tank with a VR headset and let me drift off. Oh, even a VR headset, why not just inject me with drugs, baby? That'll do it quicker because all I am are keys on a piano, and this is exactly the point that Tolstoy gets to. Read Tolstoy's book, Confessions. This is exactly where he goes with it. Boy, this is a really ranty one.
many things that we don't begin to doubt. I mean, just imagine what it would be like if only 1% of the population had vivid dreams at night. So most of us just sleep like animals. There's nothing that it's like to be us for 8 hours a night. But
Most of us sleep like animals. Harris, you say we are animals. Why would you use a phrase like that? If you can't even hold to your philosophy, I don't know why I should try. Oh, sorry, that's probably unfair.
And some percentage of the population talk about traveling and meeting people and having all of these illogical encounters. Dreams would be much stranger, and many people would doubt their existence, but they would exist just as much as they do.
And we doubt the sanity of people who had them, probably, as well.
Yeah. But did you fully answer your question? Do you want to say more about
No, Sam, you answered it about yourself.
I mean, what is tell people what a phenotype
is the external, not sorry, external, the manifestation of genetic effects. And from a Darwinian point of view, the phenotypic effects by which a gene is selected. So there'll be genes that affect wing size, eye color, hair color, intelligence. These are
Okay, so those of us who haven't had biology for 40 years, what's a phenotype? A phenotype is the physical. I'm trying to answer this, and I'm not a biologist. Someone will catch me in the comment section, I know. It's the physical expression of the gene. So you've got the gene that we represent in these 4 letters, amino acids, blah, 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 blah. And so because of my genetic material, I'm 6'4" and have a huge nose and a bald head, and I'm losing my hair. That's the phenotype of the genetics in me that are causing me to lose my hair, and the reason I'm tall and big and have a huge voice. So that's the phenotype.
all phenotypic effects. Conventionally, phenotypic effects are confined to the body in which the gene sits. So genes exert their phenotypic effects by influencing embryological processes. And so the shape of the body, the color of the body, the behavior of the body are all influenced by the genes inside the body. That's conventional phenotype.
Okay, so conventional phenotype is that my genetics have caused me to be like this. And if you take a look at a picture of my father about this age, when my beard's a little longer, he had the side and no mustache, but for the most part, there's a lot of genetics going on, baby. You can ask my mother. That's the phenotype. It's restricted to my body. Now Dawkins says, I think probably the most important thing that I realized is that these phenotypes don't just affect my body, they have far more effects. Well, I'll let him explain his own idea.
Extended phenotype is phenotypic effects of genes which are outside the body in which the gene sits. And the easiest examples to think of are artifacts, things like beaver dams, birds' nests. These are quite clearly phenotypes. They quite clearly influence the survival of the genes that make them. So a bird's nest is made by genes in the same limited sense, or not so limited sense, as the bird's tail and the bird's eyes and the bird's wings. And the nest contributes to the survival of the genes, which is what matters in the selfish gene view of life, just as surely as the wings and the tail of the bird contribute to the survival of the genes that made them. So although the nest is not a part of the bird's body, it is a part of the phenotype by which the genes lever themselves into the next generation.
Okay. And you're on YouTube, you can rewind it and listen to them again. You can go to the website and listen to them again and listen to the whole thing. But the idea, extended phenotypes, that the phenotype, genetically beavers build dams, genetically birds build nests. And so the phenotype isn't just limited to the height or the wings or the color or any of those things. The phenotype gets expressed outside of the body into a beaver dam, outside of the body into a bird's nest. And this then obviously positively impacts the capacity of that species to reproduce and compete in a Darwinistic sense in the rest of the environment. He calls this an extended phenotype. Well, this is a really interesting idea, and yeah, it stands to reason, and I can see why this caught Peterson's attention.
Well, if you buy that, and I think you have to, then effects that parasites have on hosts, there are numerous examples, fascinating, rather lurid examples of parasites which affect the behavior or the morphology of the host in such a way as to improve the survival of the parasite. Well, that means that parasites' genes are influencing host behavior and host morphology in the same...
Pause there. Parasite genes are influencing host behavior and host morphology, and we know this. In a sense, the bacteria there, Peterson makes this point, there are more bacteria in us than there are cells in our body. I don't know if that's true or not. I'll take his word for it. Those parasites, in a sense, are... the bacteria are, in a sense, a parasite. Parasite, just like Finchness is the variable, parasite is a variable. Parasite, that word describes a relationship, okay? The word describes a relationship. A thing isn't a parasite. In a sense, parasite is the relationship between two different organisms. And C.S. Lewis is going to get into this in his book Miracles, because it's an interesting relationship. And sometimes it can be a mutually beneficial relationship. Sometimes it can be a one-sided relationship. The example that Dawkins is about to give is a really cool example.
Kind of way as any gene influences phenotype. So when an animal is induced by, there's a thing called a brainworm, for example, which is a worm that gets into a fluke or a snail, there are various things like that, and causes the intermediate host, the snail or the fluke. Let's stick to snail. Causes a snail to be eaten by a sheep. So, the brainworm is a fluke, and it gets into the snail and causes the snail to be more likely to be eaten by a sheep, and it does so by moving into the eyes of the snail and making the eyes pulsate in a sort of...
That's wild, and I really want to look that up on YouTube, but I'm already way too ADHD, and that's why my videos are so dying long.
Rather frightening way. And calling the attention of an animal like a sheep or a cow to eating the snail.
And why do pulsing eyes in a snail get the attention of a sheep and a cow? That's by no means self-evident, but yet it's wild. And who would think up a world like this?
Which means that the parasite, the fluke, then gets into the next part of its life cycle.
And this parasite didn't just sit there and think up one day, boy, I'm going to get into that snail, I'm going to make his eyes go buggy, and then a sheep's going to eat me, and that way I can get into the sheep, and that way I can mass produce and, look at the malaria virus. There's a long section in that in the book 1493 on the malaria virus. Fascinating stuff, but remember, parasite is a relationship.
So the fluke genes are influencing the behavior of the snail and the eyes of the snail. The change in the snail is part of the phenotype of fluke genes, extended phenotype. And if you buy that, which is a sort of further step, then something like this bird song, say male bird song, which say influences female birds, actually physically causes the ovaries of the female to swell.
The male bird's song causes the ovaries of the female bird to swell. Okay, where's this going? This is fascinating stuff.
This does happen. The swelling of the ovaries of a female bird is extended phenotype of genes in the male which make the male sing the song.
The swelling ovaries is extended phenotype of the genetics in the male that get him to sing, that make her ovaries swell and obviously ready for reproduction. Okay, extended phenotype. Wow, powerful. I can see why this got into Peterson's mind, and I can understand why he didn't connect this up with extended phenotype, because that's what he's talking about. Because with these two talking here, this is going somewhere.
Which has this effect. So the extended phenotype then becomes a way of looking at the whole of animal communication, where one animal influences the behavior of another. I have not done justice to the extended phenotype. Read it.
So, what are the prospects that religion or something like it is part of our extended phenotype?
Yeah.
So, oh, no, he asked the question. And again, Harris is right. This is probably his big contribution. He wants to ask these questions, and I think this is part of the reason why philosophy continues to be relevant today, because philosophy is this older science that got branched off and differentiated into the whole scientific world, but in a sense the philosophers still sit at this nexus point and say, oh, you just said this about biology. What is religion?
Yes, I don't think I want to say that.
No, I imagine you wouldn't.
And just like Peterson says, things get compressed and we only remember what it is. Yeah, why did Peterson remember this? Why did he forget extended phenotype? Why did he remember this conversation? Because exactly what Peterson, the point he makes with the apes and the tracking eyes, that we see what we want to see, we hear what we want to hear. Ding, 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 ding. This is connecting up the world. Sam Harris knows it. Richard Dawkins knows it. Jordan Peterson knows it. I know it. You know it. We're having a conversation. This is wild. This is great.
Well, in order to qualify as extended phenotype, it would be necessary that genes. Well, say you took two preachers.
Preachers had never been so important.
One of whom was a very good preacher who recruited lots and lots of people into his church.
I must be a very bad preacher because I have a tiny church.
Another of whom wasn't. That could be extended phenotype, but only if there was a genetic difference between these two preachers, which caused one of them to be an effective recruiter and the other one not. That would be, but I don't think that's very likely to be true.
Now it's really fun here because his definition of an effective preacher is one who is a great recruiter. So in other words, Eugene Peterson, not Jordan Peterson, Eugene Peterson, a very famous writer who always pastored small churches. He must not have been an effective preacher, whereas, of course, George Whitefield was the most effective preacher. But it's just funny, the filters here that Dawkins has about an effective versus an ineffective preacher.
Well, wait a minute. Just to quite literally play devil's advocate here. If there's a gene for religious enthusiasm, or a set of genes for a susceptibility to that range of experience and a fundamental lack of intellectual honesty or a lack of concern, then
we're being so pejorative there, but I'll forgive you because the conversation's great.
whether what you're saying is true. So a increased capacity for self-deception and therefore deception of others, say. I mean, that seems to me plausible.
I think
so that's
plausible.
a very effective preacher, yes, who's filled with the charisma of being absolutely sure about what he's saying and energized by his passion for the whole project.
That's true.
Ironically, this is exactly the inverse of Jordan Peterson's lying preachers. For Jordan Peterson, preachers lie because they don't believe it. And Sam Harris says, well, the most effective preacher, even if he's deceived, is the, because he's deceived, gains the most persons.
And I think it probably is true that there are genetic. When you say a gene for something, all you ever mean is a genetic difference that causes a phenotypic difference. So
now I don't want to leave this. Here's the irony of this, and we're going to get into this a little bit later. The heart of the difference, if you read C.S. Lewis's Miracles, between the supernaturalist and the naturalist is the naturalist uses the pragmatic argument that, well, we might not have a capacity to know the truth when we see it, given to us by God. That's essentially a Calvinist theistic argument, Augustinian, perhaps. But people who work out things that approximate the truth, that has a competitive advantage in the world. What Sam Harris has just said, in religion, it's the reverse. Pastors who believe the delusion so much themselves can convince other people to believe the delusion. What you've just said is that this is pragmatism in reverse. That in fact, your Darwinian mechanism is reinforcing the lie rather than the truth. Now that casts doubt on the entire pragmatic argument to try to save the naturalist from the problem of truth. Because the problem that, and again, once I get into C.S. Lewis's miracles, we're going to get into this deeply, because the problem the naturalist fundamentally has is the naturalist says all we know is basically shaped by a Darwinian process, which says that that better answers that get closer to truth will tend to give an advantage in the environment and therefore in the very long term win out. Okay, and we're going to find C.S. Lewis completely destroying that idea in his book, and he just demolishes it. And I think if you want to see a more technical account of that, read Alvin Plantinga's Where the Conflict Really Lies. But the irony of this is that Sam Harris has basically put forward this argument and said the truly in order for someone to be an effective pastor, they must be further away from the truth, and so decidedly absorbed by the lie that they convince others of that. Now, I think that argument is correct, because I see all kinds of people with all kinds of foolish ideas who are completely, you can't, it is really hard to sell people on something you don't finally believe, because your eyes give you away and your life gives you away. So if you believe in Santa Claus, you really, really do, and you're going to have to live in that world of Santa Claus. And if you really believe in Santa Claus and you really live out the Santa Claus fantasy, well, you'll probably derive a cult behind you. But what that is a counterexample to the entire pragmatist argument that we can account for our capacity to know the truth by Darwinistic mechanisms. Now, hopefully that'll be clearer as I continue to do this video series.
So, the best way to show that would be twin studies. If you can show that that identical twins, monozygotic twins, if one of them is a religious maniac, the other one probably will be as well. If that's true, and if that's not so true of fraternal twins, dizygotic twins, then you've shown that there is a genetic effect on religion.
I want a pastor twin study. I really do. I want to see two pastors who are identical twins, and you got to be out there, both having churches. Are your churches the same size? Do your wives have the same names? I love twin studies. They're great, but I want to see a twin study on pastors. But anyway, let's keep going with the conversation. So in other words, this is extended phenotype, and that's Darwin's idea, and it's a fabulous idea, and it's, of course, Harris connects it up with religion, and as Peterson says, at that point they just kind of leave it alone, because where's this going? Well, even the way we talk about genes, when we say genes engineer, we make them the subject of the sentence, and we make them an actor, and we almost personify them. We're making them the cause to an effect, and as the Metaphysical Club mentions, we almost can't use agency, mind, and persons lurking behind our language when we talk about these things. Now, I want to get into Yuval Harari and his very interesting book, Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. Many have pointed out there's all kinds of flaws in this, but what's so fun about this book is it's a very low resolution, fast, running through the history of human beings. And he talks about the cognitive revolution, where human beings radically separate themselves from the rest of the animals. Dreaming like animals, Sam Harris. Really? Really? Legend, myth, gods, and religions appear for the first time in the cognitive revolution. Many animals and human species could previously say, careful, a lion. Thanks to the cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens acquired the ability to say, the lion is the guardian spirit of our tribe. This ability to speak about fictions is the most unique feature of sapient language. In other words, what differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom? It's our capacity to do story. It's our capacity to manage the storyverse. And this is such an enormous advantage over lions and tigers and bears and gorillas and chimpanzees. This is such an enormous advantage. It accounts for everything that we see. Now, again, Harari's going to say, well, how did we get this? Well, it must be chance. And you have to say, what do you mean chance? A particle being released by a distant star that somehow makes its way all the way into our atmosphere, through the ionosphere, through the magnetic shield, and impacts my genes to the degree that it changes and I morph and my brain grows, and now I am capable of participating in the storyverse. This is not chance. That is the wrong word for it. That is cause. So, pick your poison. You want to have human agency or you want to have determinism? Now, I as a Calvinist am used to dealing with determinist ideas, because in the range of Christian ideas, Calvinism has tended to be the one that has flirted with determinism more than many. Calvin via Augustine and so on and so forth. But don't call it chance, because you're going to have to account where this chance comes from. And again, we're going to get into that when we get into miracles. And so, I really do want to get there, because C.S. Lewis's book continues. I read that book almost continuously, because it helps me try to sort out all these issues. And I'm not a trained philosopher, and so reading Alvin Plantinga is hard, but reading C.S. Lewis is easy. And wow, C.S. Lewis has a way with words. So, again, chance? Oh, let's talk about evolution. Let's talk about process. But when you say chance, you are having a conversation about minds. And again, that is, I think, the sticking point when it comes to us as human beings. Now, he continues, until the cognitive revolution, the doings of all human species belong to the realm of biology, or if you so prefer, prehistory. I intend to avoid the term prehistory because it wrongly implies that even before the cognitive revolution, humans were in a category of their own. In other words, Harari is saying we don't become sapiens, and look at the terminology, until we have the capacity for this. Now again, this oh boy, this goes off in so many different ways, and it comes from so many different places. But so okay, let's grant the category here. From the cognitive revolution onwards, historical narratives replace biological theories as our primary means of explaining the development of Homo sapiens. Remember the conversation? Remember where I began the conversation with Dawkins and Harris. Harris's question to Dawkins was, 500 years from now, what are we going to look like? And Dawkins says, oh, we'll look like we look now. Why? 500 years is nothing in terms of genetic evolution. 500 years changes nothing. And you have to say, well, how on earth have human beings changed the script so radically in the last 10,000 years of human civilization? And Harari would say that's because of the storyverse. Because story, our representation of genetics has 4 letters. The English alphabet has 26. Oh, gosh, I hope I got that right. I haven't thought about that in years. But we have all of these. And no matter how many monkeys with typewriters and paper you give them, how long is it going to take to come up with the works of William Shakespeare? How long is it going to take for them to come up with an English sentence? Why on earth do the typewriters have English characters and only 26 characters? Again, there's way too much that little story is filled with. And so what Harari says here is, now look, the cognitive revolution changes the score because story is more powerful than genetics. And then Harris says, yeah, but what if we start adapting ourselves? And Dawkins says, well, we've been, we haven't had any qualms about adapting dogs and cats and cows and pigs and sheep and wheat and orange trees, and we haven't had any qualms about adapting everything else in humanity. Boy, you know what that sounds like? Genesis 1. Go out and have dominion. We have had dominion. Well, again, if you look at my last video, we have had dominion in a rebellious way that has so often been to our own detriment. So the more power we have, the more our lack of wisdom and judgment is exposed, and the more damage we do to this world. And this, again, gets into one of Peterson's big points, that, and Jung, the point that Peterson makes about, now that we have nuclear weapons, we had better grow up in other ways, or we're going to blow this whole thing apart. You can find that statement almost word for word in, actually it wasn't Jung, it was Bertrand Russell. Interesting. Bertrand Russell. But Jung was making the same point, that good grief, we had better grow up as human beings. And what we mean by that is not just elevate our capacity for power, but elevate our capacity for wisdom. But here's the thing about wisdom, what I'm going to get into in terms of Jordan Peterson. Wisdom in the Bible is a word for excellence and skill. So in other words, the word wisdom in the Bible has both in it the capacity to choose the right and power and ability and excellence. And in a sense, all of that has to be married together, or we're going to destroy ourselves. And Jordan Peterson can't remember the citation. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's the beginning of the book of Proverbs. And it's quoted a number of times in the Bible. So, back to Harari. From the cognitive revolution onwards, historical narratives replace biological theories as our primary means of explaining the development of Homo sapiens. To understand the rise of Christianity or the French Revolution, it is not enough to comprehend the interaction of genes. Now, this extended phenotypes, well, now we're knocking at the door. Because genes are involved, but Harari is saying, yeah, but genes change too slowly. And Harris is saying, yeah, but what if we start manipulating them? Well, what are we talking about if we're talking about us monkeying with our own genes? We're talking about the complete mastery of the genosphere from the storyverse. That the storyverse now in humanity has now taken control of the genosphere, and we're 4 letters. Heck, we can manage that. Look at all we do with all the other letters of the alphabet. So this is the point. That storyverse is way more powerful than genetics. Genetics is powerful, and we're continuing to be in that play. But storyverse, baby, eats it for lunch. It is necessary to take into account the interaction of ideas, images, and fantasies as well. We are what we want. Now, let's get into Jung's collective subconscious. A commenter made the comment that when I talk about the Jungian great cloud of witness, I'm talking about the collective subconscious. Not really. When I talk about the Jungian great cloud of witnesses, I've got to do this with my hands. When I talk about the Jungian great cloud of witnesses, this is my term for the complex subpersonalities within our own minds, within our organism. And this comes from, Peterson has been very helpful for me learning a little bit of psychology. I have a degree in history and then my degree in divinity. But Jungian basically brings into the conversation, the works of Freud and then Jung, and then the big 5 personalities, and our personalities have their own motivations. In other words, within our minds, we are complex creatures. That there's my conscious self. This also gets into Jonathan Haidt's Rider and the Elephant. There's my conscious self, but this is just a small part of the total self that is in there. And my eyes see, even if my brain is damaged in a way that I don't consciously know that I'm seeing, by the galvanic skin response. And again, Peterson makes this. And all of you who are up on your Jordan Peterson videos know all of these references, and I don't have to go back and show you them. So that's a very low resolution way of hyperlinking to them and pinging them. So the Jungian great cloud of witnesses is, even as I go through the day, my conscious mind puts together this manifest image that comes from the philosophical conversation. My conscious mind sees this manifest image, but it's really only seeing just tidbits and pieces. I only see what I want to see because that's the selection that's going on. But this Jungian great cloud, all of these sub-me's within me, all these smaller little personalities, and again, I think of that movie Inside Out, that latest Pixar movie. All those other little characters within me that are not fully formed persons, but like kind of little sub-persons, they're all watching too. And they're seeing stuff. And their relationship with this conscious is, in and out. And this is where Jung starts, Jung and Freud start interpreting their dreams, because what they're looking to do is try to get into that level. In a sense, it's kind of the conscious mind trying to invade the subconscious. But the subconscious mind is not dumb. And they're gonna play tricks. Oh, you think you know me now? You think you can be my master? So this is the conscious mind and our subconscious. But my Jungian great cloud of witnesses is still in my own head. Now Jung is going to take this a dramatic step further, and this is why Jonathan Haidt has the conversation with Jordan Peterson, and Jonathan Haidt is all excited because he's found someone in academia who is saying, yeah, I'm reading Jung. Now, why would reading Jung in an academic setting be like, getting together with a group of pastors and saying, oh, I read in Playboy yesterday. All the pastors say, oh, pastors oughtn't to read Playboy. Well, scientists oughtn't to read Jung. Well, why is Jung persona non grata? Well, read Jung. You'll find out. Read his autobiography. And so where Jung goes with this is Jung says there's more going on here than the materialist. Let me get back to my slide because I always digress. So my Jungian great cloud of witnesses is within an organization. I'm not really talking about the collective subconscious, but the storyverse is the strata that connects our individual clients together. And I'm thinking in terms of computer metaphors. If you have a client-server relationship, the server is in the cloud, and the clients are taking data back and forth. Now what happens if let's say you have a smartphone and you have client software? I have my client inbox software from Google. That in fact that client software is only showing me on the screen. That in a sense is like the conscious mind. But the memory of my smartphone, all of this has there's a whole lot more data in the phone that I can maybe pull up via the interface. So you have the interface, you have the client, you have the server in the cloud. And in a sense, that's what we're talking about. And so when the little bird that Richard Dawkins talks about, when the male chirps and the female's ovaries swell, that's an extended phenotype. Okay? It's extended. But here's the thing. That extended phenotype is mediated by the context. Okay? That extended phenotype is mediated by the context. What is required for the male bird's song to be heard by the female bird and to have her ovaries swell? Well, it's air. And it's a context in which air is still enough so that that little bird can chirp and sing, and the air and the sound waves will travel through the air to the female bird, and she will hear it. And in fact, there's an enormous context behind them. There's a genetic context. There's an environmental context. And you cannot have this extended phenotype without the context. And this is where we're going with Jung. Now, so I've been reading Jung's autobiography, and one of the most interesting sections of the biography is Jung and Freud. And they get together, and the relationship between Jung and Freud is very interesting because Freud is older, and Jung is a young man getting into the field, and he's got a promising career, and Freud is obviously an important person, but you know, Jung's view of Freud is very interesting. You should read the chapter. Jung appreciates a lot of the contributions of Freud, but Freud's kind of a jerk. Freud's kind of full of himself, and Freud has issues. And Jung sees his issues, and Jung isn't afraid to talk about Freud's issues. But then we get into this very interesting section of the chapter where we get into parapsychology. And now we can see that a scientist talking about parapsychology is like a pastor talking about what he read in Playboy. It interested me to hear Freud's views on precognition and on parapsychology in general. When I visited him in Vienna in 1909, I asked him what he thought of these matters. Because of his materialist prejudice, okay, now our worldviews are showing. This is the story verse in action, baby. He rejected the entire complex of questions as nonsensical, and did so in terms of so shallow a positivism that I had difficulty in checking the sharp retort on the tip of my tongue. It was some years before he recognized the seriousness of parapsychology and acknowledged the factuality of occult, in scare quotes, phenomena. Now, he put scare quotes around it because even Jung is afraid of being a pastor who says he read something in Playboy. While Freud was going on his way, I had a curious sensation. It was as if my diaphragm were made of iron and were becoming red hot, a glowing vault. Now, a pastor can't hear this and not think of Jeremiah and a fire in his belly, and he has to talk. Well, where could Jung have gotten that? Well, he's the son of a preacher. Jung read the Bible. Jung doesn't draw the hyperlink to Jeremiah, but yeah, I think Jung's Jungian great cloud of witnesses would pull it up. So in that moment, there was such a loud report in the bookcase, which stood right next to us, that we both started up in alarm, fearing the thing was going to topple over us. I said to Freud, that is an example of so-called catalytic exteriorization phenomenon. What happened there? A report. Well, that's a way of saying, if I'm sitting in my room and suddenly, bang, my table cracks. Well, a little bit earlier in the book, there's a story of exactly that. Jung is sitting, and there's tension in the household, and this table cracks. This old table that was well dried out, and there's no physical reason why the table should have cracked. And Jung's like, this is the extended phenomenology, or not phenomenology, this is a phenomenological extended phenotype. This is the strata that allows the male song to hear for the female bird to hear her. Well, what are we talking about? We are talking about a non-physical environment. We're talking about them participating in a non-physical environment. That is Jung's collective subconscious. It is what would be called the spiritual realm. That there is another strata of reality, and it is a reality. This is what Jung is saying. This is why Jung is like the pastor who quotes from Playboy, because he is saying, hey, look, here it is. And so he says to Freud basically, aha, all this tension between us got manifest in something popping in the bookshelf. Oh, come, he exclaimed. That is sheer bosh. Freud is not a preacher who will quote from Playboy. It is not, I replied. You are mistaken, Herr Professor. And to prove my point, I now predict that in a moment there will be another such loud report. Sure enough, no sooner had I said the words that the same detonation went off in the bookshelf. Oh my, where are we? What is happening? And now, not only have I energized all the materialists that say, with Freud, that is sheer bosh. That is BS. Well, now we've excited all the religionists that say, well, you shouldn't have put occult in scare quotes. But all the spiritualists say, yeah, see, there's something deeper. Oh, we're in the triangle. Watch my video on The Office. We're in the triangle. Sure enough, so you have the second report. To this day, I do not know what gave me this certainty. It was the spirits. A Greek would say it was a spirit. But I knew beyond all doubt that the report would come again. Read Lerman's. So there's an anthropologist. I forget her, Lerman, her last name is, who writes a book. She decides to get into a vineyard church and to do an anthropology of basically Christian Pentecostals. Pentecostalism is a cultural shift that has to do with secularism, because Pentecostals, in a sense, deny the secularist premise and are fully spiritual. And T.M. Lerman, I think that's her name. I'll look it up and put it in the notes. Basically writes an anthropologist view of these people living in a secular age who essentially deny it. Well, the same thing's happening here with Jung and Freud. And Freud is saying, this is bosh. And Jung is saying, no, somehow I knew. Freud only stared at me aghast. I do not know what was in his mind or what his look meant. In any case, the incident aroused a mistrust of me that I had the feeling that I had done something against him. I never afterwards discussed the incident with him. Of course not. Now again, it's C.S. Lewis begins his book with miracles, talking about the fact that the only person who knew who C.S. Lewis knew, who reported to have seen a ghost, was a person who didn't believe in ghosts. And even after they saw a ghost, they didn't believe in ghosts. And C.S. Lewis makes the point, it is not so much that seeing is believing, because if we have a philosophical system that prejudices us against a belief, well, we know this about confirmation bias. We don't believe it, even if we've seen it. We find another reason for it. And so the line we're dealing with is this line, and this is the line between the materialists and the naturalists and the supernaturalists. And this is the line that Peterson is working. Now, there are lots of other interesting examples of this in Jung's autobiography. And so, Parapsychology, the report of the bookshelf, there's the broken table and the shattered knife. The response of his colleagues. So another place, Jung is a student and he's studying psychology and he starts talking about ghosts. And all of his colleagues are like, they're embarrassed. Well, what's this experience? What's this experience of embarrassment here? Well, that exactly describes what's going on psychologically in terms of these two camps. Now they'll want to say, well, yeah, ghosts aren't real because the spiritual realm isn't real. Well, what keeps me from saying that? It's public convention. It's social pressure, which is why, which is how all of this works. Now, another video I want to do is I want to have a little bit of Peterson and I want to have some Dallas Willard, because Dallas Willard gets into this, because Dallas Willard was in a sense an academic like Peterson who taught at USC, and Dallas Willard decided he, like Peterson, was going to be honest about his convictions, and he talked openly about his beliefs, and what he noticed was that what really shapes worldview is sociology of knowledge. It's peer pressure. It's public bias. And so this way, Peterson, following Jung, is daring to say, and you'll have Peterson saying things like, well, who's to say whether the resurrection is true? We don't know the capacity. Well, what does he mean? Well, he's in a sense following Jung here in the collective unconscious. And I would say, in some ways, Jung's language of collective unconscious is trying to put a foot in the door of secularism and saying, maybe it isn't all that you think it is. Maybe your biases are talking. And again, I use this for my sermon on Logos. It is essentially the crossing, and it's the storyverse invading nature, as C.S. Lewis would say. And see the C.S. Lewis doodle on the Grand Miracle. That's just doodle, C.S. Lewis doodle, Grand Miracle. You'll hit it. But this is the word becoming flesh. This is the idea manifesting itself. And this is why, I'm still reading Jung's autobiography. This is why he gets into alchemy. And it's like, alchemy? You've got to be kidding. Well, this is what Jung and Peterson have in common, is that they, and one of the things I appreciated about Peterson right away was that he's not about to lie. He's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. And every time I see someone taking a swipe at Peterson, I think about a little card in a little game called King of Tokyo that says you're only making him stronger. The more you push at him, the stronger he gets. The more you yell at him, the greater his YouTube following will go. If you really want to stop Jordan Peterson, the only way to do so is to ignore him. Now, because this is exactly the point, because Peterson is daring to say, and this is why he is sparking conflicts with whom he's sparking conflicts, and why his conversations with Sam Harris are so interesting and Brett Weinstein are so interesting, is because Peterson is saying the line can be crossed. The word can become flesh. And then Peterson is going further to say, if we lose this in our culture, we slide into tyranny and nihilism. It is built into the spiritual world and the storyverse and the idea world that is where this goes. Well, see, here's the thing. If you accept this idea, you are pretty much accepting the premise that the storyverse trumps the physical world, and that there might, what is the storyverse? What is the relational universe? It isn't material. It's more like mathematics. Show me a number. Well, I can show you one cell phone, and if I pull up another, there might be two, but you can't show me a number. But yet numbers govern. And this is what essentially C.S. Lewis plays out in his book on miracles, and how C.S. Lewis makes his argument. So, this is why we have the triangle. This is why we have the tension between the spiritual but not religious soft supernaturalists, the religious supernaturalists who have been working this field for thousands of years, and the naturalists who have always been a minority opinion. And this is why Peterson stays in the middle of this triangle and the tension stays strong, and why this keeps producing more and more energy. Because the supernaturalists on this side of the line, like most religious groups, the spiritual but not religious camp, that say there is a reality upon which the physical world depends. And Christians say that reality is God. Now I'm doing one of the great courses that I'm going to have to bring in, because we're going to have to, at some point when we look at Jordan Peterson's God, get into the question of Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Gnosticism. But essentially what the supernaturalists say is that the physical world is not base reality. And the naturalists, many of whom are materialists, say the physical world is base reality. And Dawkins' extended phenotype must be dependent upon physics. Airways carry the songbird's voice. Rationality and truth are, however, my dear friends who are naturalists, and I do certainly love you. This is an article of my religious faith. I have to love you, and I have to treat you with love. So, Sam Harris, please forgive me when I laughed. I'm not really mocking you, and from listening to some of your podcasts, you seem like a person who is well differentiated and a tremendously fun person to talk to. And also, and this is part of my Dutch background, I love nothing more than a fierce battle where we get angry and frustrated, and in the end we shake hands and leave as friends. That, in my opinion, there's no better day than a day like that. So, yeah, Sam Harris, your problem, I don't think you can take the pragmatic way out of your problem of truth. And that's part of the reason I'm not a naturalist or a materialist. And so base reality, I want to close with this little video, which is a video I love, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Concept that a sufficiently advanced civilization will be able to create a simulation. Yeah, maybe you've answered this before? A simulation.
I've had so many simulation discussions, it's crazy.
Okay. So, because
in fact, it got to the point where basically every...
This is Josh Topolsky, who... Josh Topolsky used to be one of the editors of Engadget, and then he went, this is my next, and then it went to The Verge, and I'm a long-time listener of the Vergecast, and some of my favorite Vergecasts were with Josh Topolsky and Nilay Patel and Paul Miller, who's a Christian, and so I love listening to the current Vergecast with Dieter Bohn. I also love. I love listening to these guys talk about these things, and I always really enjoyed Josh Topolsky. And here Josh Topolsky at the Recode question has the temerity, and that's what I love about Topolsky. The guy will say anything, and he wants to ask Elon Musk about base reality.
Every conversation was the AI/simulation conversation, and my brother and I finally agreed that we would ban such conversations if we were ever in a hot tub. Okay. That was like... because that really kills the magic.
Tub, so the idea is, right, any sufficiently advanced civilization could create a simulation that's like our existence, and so the theory follows that maybe we're in the simulation. Have you thought about this? And
a lot.
Are we
even in hot tubs?
I need to know.
Notice the embarrassment. Now, if I think it's Bombard, that person who does all the body language. Notice the embarrassment. We're pastors talking about an article in Playboy, and when I was in seminary, an article came out in Playboy that was much discussed, and one of the seminarians had a Playboy magazine in the courtyard of Calvin Seminary, and archetypally, and you know who you are, and I won't name you here on the video, but you know who you are, and we all know who you were, and it was just that resonance where you're violating a norm. This should be embarrassment, and psychologically, I would love to have Jordan Peterson talk about this dynamic, because I'm not a psychologist, but psychologically, we're doing something. Look at the body language of these guys. We're here at the Code conference, and Elon Musk is this great man, but we're going to talk about something dirty. We're going to talk about something forbidden. We're going to talk about something that we don't talk about on stage, and so we're nervous about it, so we're going to laugh.
So much so it had to be banned from a hot tub.
Yeah. Look at the woman. She, oh boy, there's body language going here, and Musk is a gutsy guy. He's gonna tell us what he thinks, and Topolsky's got to have him tell it. That's why Topolsky's a good journalist.
Okay.
It's not the sexiest conversation.
Are we in?
I think here's, in my mind, like the strongest argument for us being in a simulation, probably being in a simulation, I think is the following. That 40 years ago, we had Pong, like two rectangles and a dot. That was what games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have, They're
listening to him now. Look at their body language. They're not embarrassed anymore. Why? He's talking science. He's making an argument within their realm that they can track with.
Virtual reality, augmented reality. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality. Just indistinguishable. Even if that rate of advancement drops by...
What does Peterson say about, and pastors all know this, how do we know when we're making connections? People are listening. Topolsky's shutting up. Josh Topolsky not talking? Everybody's listening. Everybody's caught. Why? This is a religious moment at Recode Decode. This is a religious moment at the Code Conference 2016. Elon Musk is talking religion, but he's talking it within a cultural framework. Now, as I continue to get into Peterson here, one of the frames that you're going to see me dealing with is my background in the Reformed. So those of you who are deep inside the Reformed community know who Fentil is, and presuppositional apologetics. And what that says is we approach people from within their cultural frameworks, from within their presuppositional frameworks. So in other words, we've got a community of people over here that culturally, via sociology of knowledge, they say Darwin is full of it. Okay, you have to deal with those people within that framework. My friend Fennell, sociologically, believed that the earth was flat. You have to deal with Fennell within his sociological framework. You have people over here that say Darwin basically explains how the world is. You have to deal with those people within their sociological framework. Elon Musk is dealing with these people within their sociological framework, and in a sense, he's the preacher, and he's having church, and Topolsky has set the stage.
1,000 from what it is right now. Then you just say, okay, well, let's imagine it's...
I should back it up a little so we get the whole argument.
Like 2 rectangles and a dot. That was what games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people. I mean, I think here's, in my mind, like the strongest argument for us being in a simulation, probably being in a simulation, I think is the following. That 40...
Notice the giggling. They're embarrassed.
40 years ago, we had Pong, like 2 rectangles and a dot. That was what game...
Look at her face. Look at his face. I'm almost in church here. He's happy as anything because this is a reporter's dream. So 40 years ago, we had Pong. I got to shut up and stop interrupting him.
Games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality, augmented reality. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality, just indistinguishable. Even if that rate of advancement drops by 1,000 from what it is right now, then you just say, okay, well, let's imagine it's 10,000 years in the future, which is nothing in the evolutionary scale. So given that we're clearly on a trajectory to have games that are indistinguishable from reality, and those games could be played on any set-top box or on a PC or whatever, and there would probably be, billions of such, computers or set-top boxes, it would seem to follow that the odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
So
tell me what's wrong with that argument.
Is the answer yes?
The argument is probably, I mean, but I just like, is there a flaw in that argument?
I mean, someone.
I'm not sure what the error.
No, the argument makes sense. So the assumption then is that somebody beat us to it.
Okay. Why does he want? Musk just gave him the argument. Musk doesn't want to say the answer. Why not? Why doesn't Musk want to say the argument? It's embarrassing. He is threatening his public bona fides by basically opting out of secularism, opting out of naturalism and materialism. He is embarrassing himself. And Topolsky is a good journalist. He says, no, you got to say it. It's the same game we play on Sunday morning talk shows with politicians. Topolsky's like, you got to say it. I'm going to make you say it. I'm going to say it. And Musk's like, I already said it. No, you haven't said it. You got to say it.
And this is a game.
No, there's a 1 in billions chance that this is base reality.
Oh.
And Musk won't say it. Why do we love Peterson? Well, he comes a little closer to saying it. He's almost saying it. He's saying it in his own ways. Doggone it. But look at the body language. They're working it. Everybody knows what's going on.
Oh, okay. What do you think?
Well, I think it's 1 in billions.
Okay.
And that is a Peterson-esque statement. That is a Peterson-esque statement. Because culturally, and this is why, again, I don't have to pull up the video because all of you have seen it how many times. This is why, well, are you, do you believe in the resurrection? Well, what does it mean to believe? And what does the resurrection mean? And I'm just saying that we don't know the capacity of a fully realized individual to change reality. Well, what if reality is not what we think it is? And Peterson will say that. Reality is a very strange thing. We hardly know what it is. So now suddenly we're starting to doubt our doubts. Now suddenly we're asking some very big questions. And now suddenly this entire wave of secularism that has been pushing through our society for years is coming back the other way. And this is why Brett Weinstein is concerned. And this is why Sam Harris is concerned. And this is why, Jordan Peterson is going to be an outcast. But he's going to be an honest one because he's telling us what he thinks. And Elon Musk, Topolsky keeps pushing him.
That seems to be clearly what it suggests.
Right.
And actually, arguably we should hope that that's true, because otherwise, if civilization stops advancing, then that may be due to some calamitous event that erases civilization. So maybe we should be hopeful that this is a simulation, because otherwise...
Because they could reboot it.
Well, otherwise, either we're going to create simulations that are indistinguishable from reality, or civilization will cease to exist. Those are the two options.
Yeah. I like those odds.
So there we are. That's why it's one of my favorite videos, and I'm glad I could share it with you. So yeah, I'm over 2 hours, and like I said, I'm only 4 minutes into Biblical Series 3. My goal, last night I went to bed and I thought, okay, I'm just gonna give little comments, and we're gonna mostly watch Peterson. I'm gonna give little comments. So then this morning I got up and I started again reviewing it, and I got 3 minutes in. I said, I can't leave this one alone. I have to find this clip, and I've got to bring this stuff in. And so I thank you again for anyone for whom this is helpful. This is enormously long. Maybe I'll try and take some clips out of here and do some smaller videos, because the number of people that can actually sit through 2 hours is it's dependent on a lot of things. And again, if your smartphone is set up and if you're used to listening to YouTube for hours on end, well, then this long form makes sense. But again, we're working towards getting an understanding of Jordan Peterson's God. And the reason that we're engaged with him is because Jordan Peterson is helping us figure out our world, and he's making a contribution from a psychological perspective. And he's helped me tremendously. And what really this is for me is, okay, I'm a Christian. I'm part of this camp who grew up, and I had wonderful Christian parents. And so, there's not been a period of my life that I have identified myself outside the Christian fold. But all of those cross pressures within the entire conversation of the last 500 years are in me. And so that brings doubts into my heart. And so I have to deal with it. And so what I'm doing here with you all is just dealing with this and piecing all of this stuff together as I go. So again, if this is helpful, that's the best thing I can hope for, is to be helpful. And I really hope that this whole tape took, because otherwise I just spent 2 hours of my life. It's never going to be published. So thanks for watching.